Hello everybody, here I am with the next Godzilla review, and it's one that maybe some of you have been eagerly anticipating, maybe some of you have been dreading. Yes, today we're gonna look at the divisive 1998 American Godzilla, made by TriStar, the division of Sony, which was behind the dubious dubs of the Heisei films. I've heard a lot of opinions about this movie, most of them not good, but until now I've never had an opinion of my own because I'd never actually seen it. I do remember when it came out though. I remember the hype and the hullabaloo and the mystery and secrecy surrounding its release and the monster design. What I mainly remember though is the special limited edition ice cream that Edie's came out with that was vanilla and fudge swirl, and it had mini chocolate Godzillas in it. It was delicious, and I loved it, and I ate a lot of it while it lasted. But it is kind of weird that I never saw this one. It's a monster movie, and I like those. It's also writer, producer, director Roland Emmerich's follow-up to Independence Day, which I have always loved. So you would think I would have checked this one out at some point in my life, but it always passed me by. Maybe I was put off by all the negativity surrounding it. The thing I've noticed about the 98 Godzilla is that the way you feel about it depends on the way you look at it. If you look at it as a Godzilla movie, especially if you're a hardcore Godzilla fan, then you're probably disappointed and maybe angry, although at this point, there's no use getting worked up about it because the movie's over 20 years old. But if you look at it as just a giant monster action movie, well, it's still not the best, but it's not so bad. This Godzilla is a reptile native to the French Polynesian Islands that has mutated as a result of atomic testing. The now giant lizard takes to the ocean and starts attacking things, eventually surfacing in New York City where it decides to make a home. A biologist who studies animals affected by radioactivity, played by Matthew Broderick, is brought in as a consultant by the US military, but an accidental media leak makes it so that his theory that Godzilla's pregnant is ignored. He gets booted out of the meetings, only to get picked up by a group of French Secret Service men who deem Godzilla their responsibility. While the US military goes on the hunt for Godzilla, the French guys and the biologist join forces to track down Godzilla's nest. Let's ignore the fact that it's called Godzilla for a few minutes and just talk about it like it's any other movie. If you are at all familiar with Roland Emmerich's work, as I feel I am, sort of, having seen Independence Day a bajillion times and endured The Day After Tomorrow more times than I care to admit for Jake Gyllenhaal's sake, then it's pretty easy to recognize his fingerprints all over this thing. There are a ton of characters, a ton of locations. There's the inclusion of an ironic clip from an old movie, this time 1955's It Came From Beneath the Sea. There's the destruction of national landmarks, all of them in New York City this time, although thankfully, even though the Twin Towers appear in at least 8 establishing shots, they're left intact. That would not have aged well. I don't know if you want to deem all this a signature style or a lack of originality. I'm just saying there's some duplication. Most of the characters, whether they're in it for a few seconds or the whole film, are pretty forgettable, and I'm not sold on Matthew Broderick as the lead either. Supposedly the role was written for him, but I'm not sure he carries the movie. The dorky scientist as unlikely hero isn't that out of place in a science fiction action movie like this, but there's something lacking. Maybe it's that he's not lovably weird enough, like Jeff Goldblum in Independence Day was, which I'm pretty sure is what Emmerich was trying to recapture here.
Wrong floor.
The attack and destruction scenes aren't bad, the monster's absurdly long tail inflicts a lot of damage, and destruction and disaster are kind of Emmerich's things, so they should be decent. And the music, especially in the opening titles, is appropriately epic. The score is composed by David Arnold, who also did Independence Day, which explains why some of it sounded awfully familiar. Unfortunately, a lot of the story's attempts at drama or tension get undercut because there's so much stuff that makes me roll my eyes. There are the little things, like why is it almost always raining in New York, And remember when I mentioned the unexpected use of the dolly zoom in Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla? Well, that happens twice here. That is really not a visual effect that you want to overuse. And I was really surprised that they had 2 instances of this predictable gag virtually back to back.
I think we got him. Oh, I think I lost him.
There are a lot of one-liners, and there's dialogue played for comic relief that's just dated or corny or just not funny. And there are a lot of running gags, like everyone mispronouncing the main character's name, Jean Reno grimacing over the taste of American coffee, and, the worst one, the mayor and his assistant being an overt Siskel and Ebert parody, which was payback for their negative reviews of Emmerich's previous movies. Yikes. So, at least 85% of what I just said was negative, but there was a point, a little over halfway through, where I felt like it turned a corner and started to get better. In the third act, it moves away from just being about a giant reptile wrecking the city. We're finally done establishing the 4 main characters, and now we start moving them to one central location, Madison Square Garden, where they find Godzilla's nest and a ton of eggs, which, of course, all start hatching. I didn't know this was coming. Well, I figured there was going to be an egg and possibly a baby, but I was pleasantly surprised by the scale of this twist. It wasn't just 1 or 2 or 12 eggs, it was 200, which is probably ridiculous and bombastic, but I didn't mind at all. It recaptured my wandering attention. And it was much more engaging when the movie stopped jumping from place to place and cramming a bunch of characters into a scene. This is one location with different areas to explore within that location, where our protagonists come together and face a more immediate and personal threat. This is what I like. There should have been more of this kind of thing. I have since learned that the Baby Godzilla's plot was already in the script before Emmerich came in and started changing things. So, it's one of the few things in the movie that wasn't his idea? It was also in this section that the movie finally scored a laugh from me in this scene.
Come on, Matt, this way!
Ah! Not this way! Not that way!
So I didn't find it to be as horrible and as abysmal as some people make it sound. If you like monster movies, the good, the bad, and the ugly, then you'd probably get some enjoyment out of it. But it is a Godzilla movie, so we've got to talk about that. The movie's 2 biggest issues in my mind are the monster design and the length. The problem with Patrick Tatopoulos' monster design is that it isn't Godzilla. No wonder fans were upset when they went to the movies expecting Godzilla and found this. They do use a form of the classic roar a few times, but it doesn't look or act like him at all. This monster is so reviled by the fans that it has been renamed Zilla and actually makes an appearance in 2004's Godzilla Final Wars, where it does not last long in a fight. But even taking Godzilla out of the equation, I don't like the way this thing looks. Mainly the head design, which isn't just ugly, but goofy. Looks to me like it's got a doofy grin on its face, which makes it impossible for me to take it seriously. Allegedly, Emmerich said he did not want his monster to look like a dinosaur. Okay. If it's not supposed to look like a dinosaur, why do I keep thinking of Jurassic Park or The Lost World? Not to mention that the baby Godzillas look an awful lot like velociraptors with T-Rex heads. And then there's the other issue, which is that at over 2 hours, the movie's too long. It's bogged down by unnecessary, irrelevant dialogue, and it's got subplots and sub-subplots that don't end up serving any purpose. I felt like it called even more attention to its length by having a fake-out ending. Here was I thinking the movie's over and saying, you know, that wasn't too bad. It actually got a lot better in the last part. And then the movie keeps going! Some serious editing probably would have helped a lot. trim down some stuff, remove a couple characters, remove some scenes, take out some of the stupid one-liners, and while you're at it, redesign the monster, or just don't call it Godzilla. The movie does leave an opening for a sequel. They actually had a trilogy planned, but obviously that didn't happen. The movie did pretty good in other countries where people weren't familiar with or didn't like Japan's Godzilla movies, but it was so poorly received in Japan and the US that was the end of that. Sort of. They did continue the story in Godzilla the Series, a 2-season animated show. So when the movie was over, my mom asked me, well, did you like it? And I answered, it's not that simple. And it isn't. I want to stress that I didn't hate this movie. There's a lot to be critical of, especially if you regard it as an entry in the Godzilla series, but there was also a part that I legitimately enjoyed watching. As a side note, I am bothered to learn that Roland Emmerich didn't like Godzilla movies, and that he and co-producer Dean Devlin blatantly disregarded Toho's list of requests regarding their property. You have no business handling the reins of a franchise if you don't like that franchise. It also sounds like they were pretty arrogant and dismissive of both Toho and the series' fans, and that's very unappealing. Still, I didn't feel like the movie was a complete disaster or a waste of time. Its greatest fault is that it calls itself a Godzilla movie when it really isn't, and that means that nobody's happy. Anyway, that's my review of the 1998 Godzilla. Originally, I intended to make this a short one, short and painless, but after I watched the movie, I felt like I needed to discuss it a little bit more. I hope you enjoyed this video. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments down below, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. And then the movie keeps going. There's a whole other 4th act added on with a taxi cab chase sequence. And, you know, if this were the real Godzilla, there wouldn't even be a taxi cab chase sequence, because he'd just blast his atomic breath at them and call it a day. I'm getting worked up. Calm down.